I'm Alex, 22 years old now, but 5 years ago, I was just a quiet teenager from a Texas farm family, expected to take over the land, live and die by the soil, just like my father and his father before him. But I had other dreams. So at 17, I did something no one saw coming. I used my diner savings to buy a patch of desert everyone called worthless. My dad kicked me out that night. No money, no plan. Just me, a busted RV, and the stars. 4 months later, NASA knocked on my door. And last week, that same father called me, asking for help to save the family farm. Before I tell you how I went from outcast to saving the very people who cast me out, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been told your dreams were a waste of time, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. Growing up in rural Texas, out in the middle of nowhere, your worth was pretty much measured by how early you could drag yourself out of bed and how much grime you could accumulate under your fingernails by sundown. That was the Cooper family creed. We'd been farming the same 100 acres for 3 generations, and everyone, and I mean everyone, expected me to step into that 4th generation. Everyone except me, that is. My dad, Frank, and my 2 older brothers, Mark and Tyler, they were cut from the same rugged cloth, tough as old leather boots, practical to a fault, and about as interested in anything beyond the farm as they were in, well, synchronized swimming. Me, I was the anomaly. While they were talking crop yields and tractor parts, I was usually tucked away somewhere, hiding astronomy magazines under my mattress like other kids might hide. You know, something a little more scandalous. Alex has got his head in the clouds again. Tyler would bellow across the dinner table whenever I'd get quiet, lost in thoughts about the cosmos or whatever obscure science podcast I'd managed to sneak a listen to that day. Dad would just shake his head, a familiar sigh escaping him. "Leave some space in that brain for actual useful knowledge, son," he'd say, disappointment a constant companion in his voice. I'd gotten used to it, 17 years of those looks. Mom, Sarah, she was the only one who ever gave me a bit of slack. Even she didn't really get it, not fully. "Just try to fit in a little, honey," she'd whisper when no one else was around. Like fitting in was a choice you could make, like picking out a different shirt. The worst part wasn't the jabs or the dismissive comments. It was that unspoken assumption, the one that hung in the air like dust after a combine harvester, that I'd eventually grow out of it. They were just waiting for me to give up on all the stuff they considered useless. Science, astronomy, my crazy dream of maybe, just maybe, going to college someday. They wanted me to embrace the Cooper legacy of calloused hands and endless field work, but I had other plans, even if I wasn't entirely sure what those plans were yet. Every day after school, and all weekend too, I worked our land just like everyone else. That was a given. The difference was I also picked up evening shifts at Brenda's diner in town. I poured coffee for truckers and local ranchers, wiped down counters that always seemed to be sticky. Dad thought it was a complete waste of time. "We got plenty of work right here that needs doing," he'd grumble. But I needed my own money that wasn't tied to the farm, money that was just mine. For 3 long years, I squirreled away almost every single dollar. While other kids at school were blowing their earnings on souped-up trucks, movie dates, or weekend parties, I was stashing mine in a lockbox I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in my bedroom. $3,822 to be exact. That cash, every single bill, felt like my ticket to somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. It wasn't that I hated farming, not really. There's something undeniably honest about watching things grow because you put in the effort to make it happen. But I hated the limitations. The narrow, suffocating view of what success looked like in the Cooper family. Success meant acquiring more land, buying fancier equipment, and then inevitably passing it all down to sons who would do the exact same thing. The cycle never changed, and nobody else seemed to mind. Except me. It was purely by accident that I stumbled upon the notice for the state land auction. Someone had left a newspaper open at the diner, and as I was wiping down the counter, a quarter-page announcement just caught my eye. The Texas Land Office was auctioning off parcels of state-owned land, and among the listings was a 150-acre plot. It was about 2 hours west of our farm, an area I knew a little, practically desert, poor soil, minimal rainfall, and temperatures that could fry an egg on a rock for most of the year. Definitely not prime farmland, by any stretch of the imagination. but something about the idea of owning my very own piece of Texas, even if it was just scrubland and cacti, it ignited something inside me. I couldn't explain it. The minimum bid was listed at $3,500. I had almost that exact amount saved up. "You doing okay, Alex?" Brenda, the diner owner, drawled, snapping me out of my trance. "You're staring at that paper like it insulted your mama." I quickly folded the paper and took it home, reading the details of the auction over and over under my flashlight that night, long after everyone else was asleep. The next 2 weeks passed in a dizzying blur of anticipation and doubt. Was I really going to do this? Spend nearly all my hard-earned savings on a patch of useless desert? What would that even accomplish? But every single time I considered backing out, I'd overhear another conversation at the dinner table about how I needed to man up or get serious about my place in the family business. And each time, my resolve would just harden again. The day of the auction finally arrived. It was a Saturday, a day I was supposed to be helping Mark and Tyler repair fencing on the north pasture. I mumbled some excuse about a school project, which predictably earned me the usual eye rolls and comments about my priorities, but they let me go. The auction was held in the county courthouse, an imposing limestone building that, as soon as I walked in, made me feel incredibly small and out of place. There were maybe 30 people there, mostly older men in cowboy hats and boots. They looked like they bought and sold land for breakfast. Probably did. I slunk into the back row, my heart thumping so loudly I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The first few lots moved quickly. Good grazing land, timber acreage, a small plot with highway frontage. Hands shot up confidently, numbers were called out, and properties changed hands with businesslike efficiency. Then came Lot 17, my desert parcel. The auctioneer described it in terms that made it sound less like Texas and more like the surface of Mars. 150 acres, minimal improvements, currently classified as marginal rangeland, with limited water access, he droned. His tone suggested even he didn't expect much interest. Opening bid is $3,500. Do I hear $3,500? The room went silent. A few of the men chuckled. My hand shot up before I could second-guess myself. "We have $3,500 from a young man in the back," the auctioneer called out, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Do I hear $3,600? More silence. A few of the ranchers turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from amusement to pure confusion. Why would a kid want that worthless patch of dirt, their faces seemed to ask. Going once at $3,500, this was it. This was really happening. Going twice. A moment of pure panic seized me. What was I doing? Sold to bidder number 47 for $3,500. I sat there in a daze as the auctioneer moved on to the next lot. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I owned land. My land. Not Cooper family land. Mine. The paperwork took another hour, and I handed over my carefully counted cash with shaking hands. By early afternoon, I was driving home, a deed and property tax form sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I felt weightless, terrified, and powerful. All at once. I should have known better than to think I could keep it a secret in a small town like ours. News travels faster than dust in a windstorm. By the time I pulled into our driveway, someone had already called my father about the Cooper boy buying that worthless Culver plot out west. They were all waiting for me in the kitchen, Dad standing with his arms crossed, Mom looking worried, and my brothers, Mark and Tyler, flanking them with identical smirks that said, clear as day, I was in for it now. You bought land? Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. Without talking to any of us, I stood up straighter. Yes, sir. At the state auction today. That wasteland out past Dryden? That's what you spent your money on? His voice was rising now, face reddening beneath a perpetual tan. It was a good price. A good price? He slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the salt shaker jump. A good price for what? You can't farm it. You can't raise cattle on it. It's worthless. Mark jumped in, his voice laced with sarcasm. What were you thinking, genius? That you'd build your rocket ship out there? Your own little space station? I kept my eyes fixed on Dad. It's my money. I earned it working at that diner. Instead of putting in proper hours here, he shouted, his voice cracking. While we picked up your slack, and this is how you thank us? By throwing away good money on a middle-of-nowhere sandbox? Mom tried to intervene. Frank, he's just young. He didn't think it through. No, Sarah, Dad's voice had gone cold again, which somehow was always worse than the yelling. Our son has made his choice very clear. You think you're so much smarter than the rest of us, always have. Too good for honest work, too special to be just another Cooper man. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the ancient clock on the wall. 3 generations of Coopers watched me from their faded photographs, their stern faces seeming to judge me alongside the living. Well, congratulations, son, Dad finally said, each word dripping with bitter disappointment. You got what you wanted, your own place, far away from all of us simple folk. I started to respond, but he cut me off. You want that land so bad? Fine, go live on it. Go build whatever fantasy you got cooked up in that head of yours. But don't expect any help from us. Tyler snickered. What's he gonna do out there? There's not even running water. Dad's eyes never left mine. That's his problem now, isn't it? He's made his choice, made it real clear where his priorities lie. Go to your desert, Alex, and don't bother coming back until you're ready to be part of this family for real. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd expected anger, maybe some shouting, but not this. Not being told to leave, to go. What had I done? And by trying to claim something for myself, had I just lost everything else? Everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to break, to apologize, to admit I'd made a terrible mistake. My brothers looked almost gleeful at my impending surrender. But something hardened inside me instead. 17 years of feeling like I didn't belong, of hiding who I really was, of trying to squeeze myself into a mold that never fit. It all crystallized into a single piercing moment of clarity. If I backed down now, nothing would ever change. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll go. Dad's expression flickered with surprise. He hadn't expected me to call his bluff, but it wasn't a bluff, not for either of us. We'd reached a breaking point neither of us had seen coming until it was right there, squarely in front of us. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs to my room. Behind me, I could hear Mom's distressed questions and Dad's firm, unyielding responses. My fate had been decided, or rather, I had decided it. As I threw clothes and essentials into my school backpack, a strange calm settled over me. I had land, my land. I had about $300 left to my name, and I had the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of having nothing left to lose. An hour later, I was back in my truck, pulling away from the only home I'd ever known, driving toward a patch of desert that was now the only place in the world that truly belonged to me. I had no idea what I was going to do when I got there, but for the first time in my life, the decision would be entirely mine to make. The drive to my new property took almost 3 hours. 3 hours of flat, endless Texas landscape, gradually transforming into something that looked more like Mars than Earth. By the time I reached the boundary markers the land office had described, the sun was setting, turning the wasteland into a sea of red and gold. I parked my truck on what was now, technically, my front yard. 150 acres of dirt, scrub brush, and not much else. No neighbors for miles, no water source, no electricity, no house. Just me, my truck, and whatever I'd managed to throw in the back before leaving home. That first night was rough. I slept in the cab of my truck, windows cracked, waking up drenched in sweat as the morning sun turned the vehicle into an oven. The reality of what I'd done hit me hard in the daylight. What was my plan here? Die of dehydration to prove a point to my father? Turns out, small towns have one major advantage. Word travels fast. By noon, my phone rang. It was Old Man Miller, who owned a salvage yard where Dad sometimes bought tractor parts. "Heard you got yourself in a situation, Cooper boy," he said, and I could practically hear him chewing on his ever-present toothpick through the phone. "Got an old RV that's been sitting on my lot for 3 years. Previous owner died, no family claimed it. County says it's mine to sell or scrap. It ain't pretty, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. You want it?" I couldn't believe my luck. "Mr. Miller, I only have about $300 to my name right now." "Did I mention price?" He cut me off. "Just come get this eyesore off my property. Consider it an investment in entertainment. Whole town's taking bets on how long you'll last out there." 3 hours later, I was cautiously driving a 1985 Winnebago Chieftain across the desert, praying the ancient vehicle wouldn't give up before reaching my land. It was faded, dented, and smelled like mothballs and old cigarettes. But to me, it was a palace. Getting the RV set up was its own adventure. The battery was dead, so no electricity yet. The water tank was empty and probably hadn't been cleaned in a decade. But the propane stove worked, and the roof didn't leak much, so it was already better than sleeping in my truck. My first week of desert life involved a lot of trips to the nearest town, about 40 minutes away, for supplies. Water jugs, canned food, basic tools, a solar phone charger. Each trip ate into my dwindling funds. I had nobody to call for help, and everyone in town looked at me like I was either crazy or stupid, probably both. "You're the Cooper kid, right? The one living out in the Culver plot?" the hardware store owner asked, ringing up my purchases. "Your daddy know you're out there playing pioneer." I just nodded and paid for my supplies. No point explaining something they'd never understand. By week 2, I'd established a minimal survival routine. Wake at dawn to avoid the worst heat. Conserve water fanatically. Drive into town every few days to refill water containers at the gas station. Search for odd jobs to make a few dollars, and return to my patch of nowhere by sundown. It was a lonely existence for sure, but there was also a strange peace to it. Nobody telling me what to think or who to be. No disappointed looks across the dinner table. Just me and my decisions, good or bad. During these initial months, the family was a distant echo. Mom called occasionally, and those conversations were always full of awkward silences and gentle suggestions that I could always come home if I just learned my lesson. That was their harsh reaction to my new life. A cold distance, a thinly veiled judgment that I was on a self-destructive path. They weren't physically present to scold me, but their absence and their subtle "come home when you failed" undertone were just as cutting. I always told her I was doing fine, even on the days when I definitely wasn't. But in their minds, I was still the rebellious fool, probably starving out in the desert, and they were just waiting for me to crawl back. This was my return to their awareness, and it was met with exactly the cold indifference I'd come to expect. The first real game changer came about 3 weeks in. I was looking through a pile of junk behind the RV. Apparently, Old Man Miller had used the vehicle as a storage unit before gifting it to me. When I found a dusty old telescope, nothing fancy, probably something a parent had bought for a kid who quickly lost interest. But it had all its pieces and only minor scratches on the lens. That night, I set it up outside the RV and pointed it skyward. I'd always loved astronomy, but growing up on the farm, light pollution from nearby towns had limited what I could really see. Out here, in my desert wasteland, with no artificial lights for miles, the night sky simply exploded with more stars than I'd ever seen. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like spilled paint. Through the telescope, I could see the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, star clusters that looked like diamond dust scattered across black velvet. I stayed up until dawn, completely mesmerized. For the first time since arriving, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't made a catastrophic mistake after all. There was treasure here, just not the kind most people valued. Over the next month, that telescope became my most prized possession. I spent my days figuring out how to survive in the desert, and my nights exploring the cosmos from my front yard. I started taking photos through the telescope, using my phone with a makeshift adapter I'd cobbled together from hardware store parts. The photos weren't professional quality, but they captured something magical about this place. The perfect darkness, the crystal clear view of constellations and planets. On a whim, I created an Instagram account called Nomad's Land and started posting my amateur astrophotography. To my genuine surprise, people actually liked them. Comments from strangers across the world started rolling in, compliments on the clarity, asking about my equipment, wondering where on earth I was getting such perfect night sky shots. "Just my backyard," I would reply, not mentioning that my backyard was 150 acres of Texas desert that I'd bought on impulse with my life savings. By summer, I had a few hundred followers, nothing viral, but enough that logging in each morning to check comments became part of my routine. That small connection to the outside world kept me from feeling completely cut off. Life in the desert settled into its own rhythm. I found occasional work in town, helping at the feed store, doing deliveries for the pharmacy, picking up shifts at the diner when they were short-staffed. Nobody paid me much, but it was enough to keep gas in my truck and food in my stomach. I upgraded my living situation bit by bit, added a small solar panel system to power a fan and charge my phone, rigged up a rainwater collection system from the RV roof for the rare desert downpours, even built a makeshift outdoor shower using a black-painted bucket and gravity. Word about the Cooper boy living out in the desert spread to neighboring communities. I became something of a local curiosity. People would sometimes drive out just to see my setup, ostensibly bringing me supplies. But really, I knew, coming to gawk at the crazy kid who'd chosen this life. One evening in late August, about 4 months into my dessert experiment, I was setting up for a night of stargazing when a plume of dust on the horizon caught my attention. A vehicle was approaching, not unusual, as locals sometimes still came by to check on the desert hermit, as they had taken to calling me. But this wasn't a local truck. It was a sleek black SUV with government plates, moving carefully over the rough terrain toward my RV. My first thought was that I was in trouble somehow, maybe squatting on land that wasn't really mine after all. Tax problems? The vehicle pulled up about 20 yards from my home, and 2 people emerged. A man and a woman in crisp, casual attire that looked ridiculously out of place in the desert. "Alex Cooper," the woman called, shielding her eyes against the setting sun. I nodded, approaching cautiously. "That's me. Can I help you?" They introduced themselves as Dr. Emily Roberts and Dr. David Chen from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I swear, I assumed I was hallucinating from heat stroke until they handed me their business cards. "Mind if we sit down and talk?" Dr. Roberts asked, glancing at my rickety camp chairs with a mixture of amusement and hesitation. Inside the RV, which I frantically tried to make presentable while getting them water, they explained the purpose of their visit. "We've been monitoring your Instagram account," Dr. Chen said. "Those astronomy photos you've been posting, they show exceptional atmospheric clarity." "I'm just using a basic telescope and my phone," I mumbled, embarrassed by how amateur my setup must seem to actual scientists. Dr. Roberts nodded. "That's exactly what caught our attention. The image quality you're achieving with basic equipment suggests this location has extraordinarily low levels of light pollution and atmospheric interference." They went on to explain that NASA was looking for remote sites to place new deep space observation equipment, locations far from city lights, radio interference, and air traffic. Places with stable weather patterns and clear night skies. "We've analyzed hundreds of potential locations across the country," Dr. Chen continued. "Your little patch of desert here shows some of the most promising conditions we've seen." I sat there stunned as they outlined what they were proposing. NASA wanted to lease a portion of my land to build a small observation station. They would need to conduct environmental and atmospheric testing first, but if everything checked out, they were prepared to offer substantial lease payments. "We understand this is unexpected," Dr. Roberts said, watching my face carefully. "Take some time to think about it. Here's our proposal with all the details." She handed me a thick folder with NASA letterhead, filled with documents that looked more official than anything I'd ever handled before. "Why me?" I finally managed to ask. "There must be better places. Professional observatories." Dr. Chen smiled. "Sometimes the best discoveries come from unexpected places. Your Instagram photos led us here, but the preliminary readings we took on our drive confirmed our suspicions. This location has a unique combination of factors that make it exceptionally well-suited for deep space observation." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Roberts paused at the door of my RV. "Take your time reviewing the proposal. There's a lot of technical information in there, along with the terms of the potential agreement. My card is inside with my direct number if you have any questions. Whether you decide to work with us or not," she added, "you should know that those photos you've been taking, they're quite remarkable. You have a good eye." After they drove away, I sat outside, watching the stars appear one by one as darkness fell. The folder sat unopened in my lap, heavy with possibility. 4 months ago, I'd been kicked out of my family home for wasting money on a useless piece of desert. Now NASA, actual rocket scientists, thought my worthless land might be valuable after all. Not for what could be grown on it or built on it, but for what could be seen from it. The same vast emptiness that made this place worthless to my family made it priceless to scientists trying to study the stars. I opened the folder and began leafing through the documents as the Milky Way blazed overhead, wondering if this was the universe's way of telling me I'd been right all along. That folder from NASA sat on my rickety folding table for 3 days. I'd open it, read a few pages of technical jargon and legal terms, then close it again, overwhelmed. This wasn't like signing up for a phone plan or even buying my land. This was NASA, actual rocket scientists, wanting to do business with a high school graduate whose greatest accomplishment so far was surviving for months in a desert, Eventually, I called the number Dr. Roberts had left. To my surprise, she picked up on the second ring. "Alex Cooper," she said, not a question, but a statement. "I was wondering when we'd hear from you. I won't bore you with the details of the next few weeks. There were more visits from NASA personnel, this time including lawyers and land assessment specialists. There were soil samples, air quality measurements, and something called electromagnetic interference testing that involved equipment I couldn't even begin to understand. What I did understand was this. My worthless patch of desert wasn't worthless at all. It was, according to Dr. Chen, a near-perfect natural observatory. You've got minimal light pollution due to the distance from population centers, he explained, showing me readings on his tablet. The elevation and dry air create excellent visibility. There's almost no radio interference, which is increasingly rare, and the stable geological features mean minimal seismic activity. Plus, Dr. Roberts added, the isolation and private ownership make it ideal for security purposes. Some of the technology we'll be testing here is sensitive. I nodded, like I understood the full significance, but truthfully, I was still trying to wrap my head around all of it. Then came the meeting that changed everything. 5 NASA representatives and I sat in my RV, which I'd cleaned obsessively the night before. The air conditioner I'd recently installed with my diner earnings strained against the Texas heat, and the body heat of 6 people in a space designed for 2. Dr. Roberts slid a revised contract across the table. We'd like to lease 100 acres of your land for an initial period of 10 years, with an option to extend for another 10. I glanced at the number on the page and blinked, certain I was misreading. That's $5 million, I said, my voice barely a whisper. For the entire initial lease period? Yes, confirmed the NASA attorney, a serious woman with silver-rimmed glasses. $500,000 per year, paid annually in advance, with adjustments for inflation after year 3. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they could all hear it. That was more money than my entire family had made in generations of farming. Why so much? I managed to ask. This land cost me less than $4,000, Dr. Chen smiled. The land itself is only part of the equation. What we're really paying for is the guarantee of continued pristine conditions. No development, no interference, and limited human activity in the area, the lawyer nodded. The contract stipulates that you will maintain the current undeveloped state of the property. No construction, no industrial activity, minimal visitors. Essentially, we're paying you to keep doing what you're already doing. Nothing. With one key difference, Dr. Roberts added. You'll be doing nothing while allowing us to do something extraordinary. The project, they explained, was twofold. First, they'd be installing prototype telescopes and sensors to test new deep space observation technologies. Second, and more intriguing, they'd use the area to test Mars rover prototypes in an environment that mimicked certain Martian surface conditions. Your desert won't pass for Mars completely, Dr. Chen clarified, but shares enough characteristics to make initial testing valuable. The isolation is particularly useful. We can test autonomous navigation systems without risking public safety. I signed the contract right there on my wobbly Walmart folding table. My hands were shaking so badly that my signature looked like it belonged to someone else, which in a way felt appropriate. I was about to become someone else. The first annual payment hit my newly opened bank account 3 weeks later. The branch manager in town, who'd previously looked at me with barely disguised pity, suddenly became very interested in discussing investment opportunities. My first purchase wasn't anything flashy, no sports car or mansion. I bought a better solar power system for the RV, a reliable satellite internet connection, and a proper telescope. Then I enrolled in online astronomy and business courses. If I was going to be neighbors with NASA, I didn't want to sound like a complete idiot when talking to them. The hardest part was figuring out what to do with myself. The contract didn't require me to leave my land. In fact, having someone on site to keep an eye on things was considered a bonus, but it did limit what I could build or develop there. After some thought, I decided to stay on my land, but upgrade my living situation within the constraints. I replaced the ancient RV with a custom-designed tiny house on wheels. Technically not a permanent structure, so it didn't violate the contract. Solar-powered with rainwater collection and a composting toilet, it was self-sufficient and environmentally friendly. Plus, it had a rollback roof section over the bedroom so I could stargaze without getting out of bed. NASA began construction on their facility about 2 months after the contract was signed. They were as good as their word about minimizing impact. The installation was compact, efficient, and designed to blend into the landscape as much as high-tech equipment could. I was allowed to observe some of the construction, which was fascinating. The main structure was partially underground to maintain a consistent temperature and reduce visibility. Solar arrays that seemed far more advanced than commercial panels provided power, and the security system was something straight out of a spy movie. By month 4, they were operational. A small team of scientists and engineers would visit periodically to maintain equipment and conduct tests. But most of the time, the facility ran remotely. My only official responsibility was to report any unusual activity near the site, which basically meant calling if I saw trespassers, a rare occurrence given how remote we were. With financial security came a freedom I'd never experienced. I'd grown up watching every penny, working for every dollar. Now I had more money than I knew what to do with, and time to figure it out. I kept thinking about those months after I first moved to the desert, how lost and purposeless I felt, how the telescope and the stars had given me direction, how sharing those photos online had unexpectedly led to all of this. On a whim, I started a YouTube channel about amateur astronomy. Nothing fancy, just me showing people how to get started with basic equipment, explaining constellations, and sharing tips for night sky photography. I figured maybe a few dozen people might watch. Within 6 months, I had over 100,000 subscribers. Turns out, a lot of people were interested in the stars, but intimidated by the technical aspects of astronomy. My approach, casual, straightforward, occasionally fumbling, was apparently relatable. What surprised me even more than the subscriber count was the income. Between ad revenue, channel memberships, and the occasional sponsored video from telescope companies, I was pulling in $5,000 to $8,000 a month from YouTube alone. That was more than I'd made in a year at the diner, and it was just from talking about something I loved. Even without the NASA contract, I could have lived comfortably on that YouTube income, a fact that still amazed me whenever I checked my creator dashboard. The comments became my favorite part. Finally, someone explaining this stuff without making me feel stupid. Watched this with my 10-year-old daughter, and now she wants to be an astronomer. Dude, your backdrop is insane. Where are you filming this? That last comment gave me an idea. I contacted Dr. Roberts to make sure it wouldn't violate my contract, then launched a scholarship program for high school students interested in astronomy and space science. Each year, 5 students would get funding for college, plus a weekend stargazing workshop on my land, well away from the NASA facility, of course. The first workshop weekend was nerve-wracking. 5 teenagers and their parents arrived, looking at me like I had all the answers. I felt like a fraud. 6 months earlier, I'd been working at a diner. Now I was supposed to be some kind of astronomy guru. But something amazing happened under that vast desert sky. The students forgot to be cool. The parents forgot to be skeptical. And I forgot to be insecure. Together, we tracked the International Space Station, identified constellations, and captured photos of distant galaxies. By the end of the weekend, one quiet girl, who'd barely spoken the first day, was excitedly explaining nebula formation to her wide-eyed father. That's when I knew I'd found my purpose, using my ridiculous good fortune to open doors for kids who, like me, looked up at the stars and saw possibility. The program grew rapidly. I partnered with science teachers across Texas, then expanded nationwide. The scholarship fund increased as my YouTube channel and social media platforms gained traction. Companies started approaching me about sponsorships, telescope manufacturers, camera brands, even outdoor gear companies. 2 years after signing the NASA contract, I established the Nomads Land Foundation, the name a play on both my nickname and the perceived value of the desert. Its mission was simple: make space science accessible to underserved communities and rural schools that often lacked resources for STEM programs. We provided telescopes, curriculum materials, and virtual mentoring from astronomers and NASA scientists who'd become friends through my unlikely connection to the agency. Dr. Roberts even sat on the Foundation's advisory board, providing legitimacy that helped to secure additional funding. It was around this time that local media got wind of the full story. A reporter from a nearby city's newspaper showed up one day, asking questions about the mysterious NASA facility and the desert hermit who now ran a growing educational foundation. The resulting article, titled Outcast Star Power: How a Patch of Worthless Desert Made One Man a Millionaire and Changed Astronomy Education, was picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, interview requests were flooding in. People magazine wanted to do a feature. A documentary filmmaker called about rights to my story. The attention was overwhelming and, honestly, unwanted. I'd never been comfortable in the spotlight. That's partly why I'd ended up alone in the desert in the first place. But my foundation director, yes, I had staff now, convinced me that publicity would help the cause. Every interview is a chance to get more kids interested in science, she argued. You don't have to talk about yourself, talk about the stars. So I did, reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence. I steered conversations away from the money and toward the mission. I brought students onto news segments to demonstrate astronomy concepts. I leveraged my platform to announce new initiatives and partnerships. The defining moment came when the local news station from my hometown ran a story on my foundation's work. They interviewed several community members about the local boy made good. Most were predictably supportive now that I was successful, claiming they'd always known I was going places. Then they showed a clip of my father standing in the same farmyard where he'd told me never to come back. Alex always had different ideas, he said, his expression unreadable. Turns out he was right about that piece of desert. Who'd have thought it? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm, but coming from my father, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The reporter asked if he was proud of what his son had accomplished. There was a long pause before he answered. He found value where nobody else could see it, Dad finally said. That's the Cooper way, I suppose. I watched the segment alone in my tiny house, unsure how to feel. 3 years earlier, I'd been desperate for any sign of approval from my family. Now I realized their approval or disapproval no longer defined me. I'd built something of my own, something meaningful. Later that evening, my phone rang with an unknown local number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was instantly familiar, though we hadn't spoken in over a year. Alex, my father said, sounding older than I remembered. Your mother and I saw you on the news. I waited, heart pounding, wondering if this was the reconciliation I'd once craved, or just another disappointment. The foundation you started, he continued. They're putting telescopes in rural schools? Yes, I replied cautiously. We've equipped over 50 schools so far. There was a pause. The high school here could use something like that. Kids don't have much to look forward to except farming or leaving. It wasn't quite an olive branch, but it was something. A recognition, perhaps, that there were different ways to build a worthwhile life. I'll have someone from the foundation reach out to the science department, I said. Another pause. You could, do it yourself. If you want to come by, that is. The invitation hung between us, laden with unspoken history. I might do that, I said finally. I've been thinking it's time for a visit. After we hung up, I stepped outside into the desert night. The stars stretched overhead, the same stars that had guided me through the loneliest period of my life. Now they connected me to thousands of students across the country, to scientists doing groundbreaking research, and maybe, just maybe, back to the family I thought I'd lost. It wasn't just professional success that the stars had brought me. 6 months earlier, during one of my foundation's weekend workshops, I'd met Chloe. She was a graduate student in astronomy at UT Austin, who'd volunteered to help with the program. She was about my age, maybe a year or two older, but light years ahead of me in formal education. She'd arrived with a telescope that put mine to shame, and a knowledge of celestial mechanics that left me speechless. Your YouTube videos got me through some tough undergrad courses, she confessed over freeze-dried ice cream, a NASA-inspired treat I'd started serving at the workshops. You explain things in ways that actually make sense to normal humans. We'd spent that entire night pointing out constellations to students during the day, and talking until sunrise after they'd gone to bed. Something just clicked between us, like two planets falling into perfect orbit around each other. She understood my connection to this desolate place, how the emptiness of the desert made the fullness of the cosmos feel more accessible. Now she visited regularly, her university schedule permitting. We'd set up our telescopes side by side, her explaining the physics behind quasars and black holes, while I shared the stories and myths ancient cultures had created about the same stars. Sometimes we'd just lie on the desert floor in silence, holding hands and watching meteors streak across the sky. Two tiny humans contemplating infinity together. It still amazed me how one impulsive decision, buying a worthless patch of desert, had completely transformed my life. Had I stayed on the family farm, I might never have discovered my passion for sharing the wonders of space, never founded the foundation, never met Chloe. I'd have spent my life trying to fit into someone else's idea of success, rather than finding my own path among the stars. Tomorrow, NASA engineers would arrive to install new equipment at their facility. Magazine photographers would come to shoot my simple desert lifestyle for a feature. Foundation staff would call about the upcoming gala fundraiser. And Chloe would be flying in for the weekend, bringing her infectious enthusiasm and the telescope we were modifying together. But tonight, I was just a guy standing on a patch of desert that everyone had thought was worthless, looking up at the universe that had proven them wrong. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Almost 5 years after I'd been told never to come back to the family farm, I was sitting in my custom-built tiny house, reviewing plans for a new observatory my foundation was funding at a rural school in Oklahoma. Chloe was curled up on our couch, typing away on her dissertation about exoplanet atmospheres. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, but with the local area code from back home. Alex Cooper? The voice was vaguely familiar but strained, speaking almost hesitantly. Speaking, I replied cautiously. It's Tyler, your brother. As if I wouldn't recognize my own brother's voice. But then again, we hadn't spoken in almost 4 years. The drought had hit Central Texas hard that year. 3 seasons of minimal rainfall had turned farmland into dust bowls, reminiscent of the 1930s. Farmers everywhere were struggling, but according to Tyler, the Cooper farm was in particularly dire straits. Dad took out a big loan 2 years ago to expand, he explained, his voice hollow. Bought the Henderson place next door. New equipment, the works. Bank wants their money, but there's no crop to sell. I stayed silent, processing this information, while Chloe watched me with concern from across the room. She knew enough about my family history to understand this wasn't just a casual call from home. How bad is it? I finally asked. Tyler sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of generations of farmers fighting losing battles against nature and economics. Foreclosure notice came yesterday. 60 days to come up with the payment, or we lose everything, not just the new land. All of it. After hanging up, I sat staring at the wall until Chloe gently took my hand. Your family? She asked. I nodded. They're about to lose the farm. Dad overextended, then the drought hit. She didn't immediately suggest I help them, which is one of the countless reasons I loved her. Instead, she asked, how do you feel about it? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Part of me felt a dark, petty satisfaction. They'd mocked my worthless desert purchase, and now their supposedly sensible farm investment was underwater. But beneath that petty reaction was something far more complicated. That land represented generations of my family's sweat and sacrifice. Whatever my issues with my father, that legacy meant something. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell them to figure it out themselves. And part of me can't let go of the fact that it's still your family, Chloe finished for me. For the next week, I deliberated. The foundation could easily cover what my family needed. We'd recently received a 7-figure donation from a tech billionaire who'd gotten into astronomy after watching my videos. But this wasn't about ability. It was about whether I should. Chloe, ever practical, suggested a compromise. You could structure it as a business loan, set terms, expectations, boundaries. Make it clear this isn't about coming crawling back or accepting their past treatment. She was right, as usual. I called my foundation's attorney and had papers drawn up for a farm rescue loan, with fair but firm terms. Then I called Tyler back. I can help, I said without preamble, but I need to meet with Dad and discuss terms. There was a pause on his end. You're not just going to write a check? No, I replied firmly. This needs to be a conversation, face to face. If that's a problem, then I guess we're done here. Another pause. I'll tell him. When can you come? The farm looked smaller than I remembered. The Cooper family homestead had loomed large in my memory, both as a setting of countless childhood experiences and as a symbol of everything I had rebelled against. Now, it just looked like what it was. A modest farmhouse with peeling paint, surrounded by parched fields and aging equipment. Chloe squeezed my hand as we pulled up in my truck. I'd asked her to come along partly for moral support and partly so my family could see the life I had built. She wasn't a prop to show off, but her presence helped remind me of who I was now, not just who I'd been when I left. Dad was waiting on the porch, looking older and more worn than the man in my memories. Mark and Tyler flanked him like bodyguards, their expressions unreadable. Mom appeared from inside the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Some things never change. For a moment, I was 17 again, coming home late from the diner to face their judgment. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I was a founder of a successful educational foundation. I had a contract with NASA, I had made something of myself on my own terms, and I had Chloe, who believed in me without condition or expectation. I stepped out of the truck, the desert dust still clinging to my boots. "Hi, Mom, Dad." The kitchen table had always been a site of family decisions, arguments, and rare moments of unity. Now we all sat around it awkwardly, the weight of years of silence making the old chairs creak even louder. I laid out my proposal simply. The foundation would provide a loan to cover their debt and operating costs for the next year. In return, they would implement sustainable farming practices and participate in an agricultural education program we were developing to teach kids about food systems. The loan had favorable terms but was still a loan, not a gift, not a handout. Dad listened without interrupting, which was a first in my experience. When I finished, he studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've done well for yourself," he finally said. That desert plot turned out to be quite the investment. It wasn't about the money, I clarified, my voice steady. It was about finding something that was mine, not just following someone else's plan for my life. He nodded slowly. "You always were different, smarter than the rest of us, I guess." Mom reached across the table toward me, but stopped short of actually touching my hand. "We've been following your foundation in the news, the scholarships, the educational programs. We're proud of what you've accomplished, Alex." The words should have been healing. They were what I'd wanted to hear for years. But something about them rang hollow now, coming only after they needed my financial help. "We always believed in your unique way of looking at the world," Dad added, choosing his words carefully. "Just didn't know how to show it. You were always destined for something different than this farm." I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. Chloe's hand found mine under the table, a small gesture of support. "That's not how I remember it," I said quietly. "I remember being told I was wasting my time. I remember being kicked out for buying that worthless land." Dad had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We were wrong. I was wrong. You've proven that." I looked around at their faces, hopeful, contrite, and just a little bit calculating. They were saying what they thought I needed to hear to sign the check. Maybe they even half believed it now, with the benefit of hindsight and desperation. "Here's the thing," I said slowly. "You don't believe in me. You never did. You believe in what I can do for you now. You believe in the money." Tyler started to protest, but I held up my hand. "And that's fine. That's business. I'm offering a business arrangement that can save this farm, but let's not pretend this is some heartwarming family reunion where all is forgiven because suddenly my weird interest paid off." The kitchen fell silent except for the ancient wall clock ticking, the same clock that had counted down the minutes of my childhood. "Trust is expensive," I continued, looking directly at my father. "More expensive than this check. If you want that, it's going to take more than one conversation when you're desperate." Dad's face hardened for a moment into the expression I'd grown up fearing, then surprisingly softened again. "What would it take?" It was the first honest question he'd asked me in years. I looked at Chloe, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Time," I answered. "Effort. Actual interest in who I am, not what I have. I'm willing to start that process if you are. The loan is separate. You'll get the money either way, because that's the right thing to do. But rebuilding a relationship? That's going to require more than one convenient apology." Mom was crying silently. Mark looked at the floor. Tyler seemed genuinely thoughtful, and Dad, the immovable object of my youth, looked uncertain for the first time in my memory. "I'd like to try," he said finally. "If you'll give us a chance." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. As Chloe and I drove away that evening, the setting sun turned the farmland the same color as my desert, all of it temporarily beautiful in the fading light despite the drought and hardship. You okay? Chloe asked softly. I think so, I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt. For the first time, I think they actually saw me. Not who they wanted me to be, but who I actually am. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the stars beginning to appear overhead, the same stars that had changed the course of my life. You know what's ironic, I finally said. If they hadn't kicked me out, I'd have never discovered what I was capable of. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Chloe smiled. As a scientist, I'd call it an uncontrolled experiment with surprisingly positive results. I laughed and took her hand as we drove toward home. My chosen home, my desert, my stars. The future, for once, looked as bright and vast as the night sky above us. The annual Desert Night Sky Festival was my foundation's biggest event of the year. What started as a small stargazing party for local kids had grown into a weekend-long celebration that drew hundreds of attendees from across the state. We had portable telescopes set up across my land, astronomy experts giving talks, and NASA engineers bringing prototype equipment for demonstrations. It had become a highlight on the calendar for space enthusiasts throughout Texas. This year felt different, though. Standing at the entrance, greeting visitors, I spotted a familiar truck pulling into the makeshift parking area we'd set up. My father stepped out first, followed by my mother and brothers. They looked uncomfortable and out of place among the excited families and astronomy buffs, but they had come. That was something. It had been 3 months since our confrontation at the farm. The foundation's loan had saved their property, and they'd reluctantly embraced the sustainable farming practices we required as part of the deal. We'd spoken a handful of times since then, brief, sometimes awkward conversations. But this was the first time they'd accepted my invitation to visit my world. Chloe appeared at my side, sensing my tension. They showed up. That's a good first step. I nodded, watching as my family hesitantly approached the welcome booth. Let's see if they stick around for the main event. The festival was in full swing by sunset. Children ran from telescope to telescope, gasping at their first clear views of Saturn's rings, or the craters of the moon. Parents listened attentively to presentations about light pollution and the search for exoplanets. Food trucks served space-themed snacks, and a local band played ambient music that somehow perfectly matched the desert atmosphere. My family moved through it all like tourists in a foreign country. Clearly impressed but unsure of the customs, I kept my distance, letting them experience everything at their own pace. They needed to see this world I'd built without me hovering anxiously for their approval. As dusk deepened into true darkness, I took my place at the central stage area, really just a raised platform with a giant screen behind it. This was the festival's signature event. My keynote presentation about the wonders of the night sky, designed to be accessible to absolute beginners, while still engaging for amateur astronomers. Looking out at the crowd of over 300 people sitting on blankets and folding chairs, I spotted my family near the back. They hadn't left. Another good sign. Welcome everyone to the darkest night skies in Texas, I began as the first images of nebulae and galaxies appeared on the screen behind me. Tonight we're going to explore some of the most incredible objects in our universe, all visible from right here in what some people once called a worthless patch of desert. For the next hour, I guided the audience through a tour of the cosmos, from our neighboring planets to distant galaxies billions of light years away. I explained how stars are born, how they die, how galaxies collide in cosmic dances that take millions of years to complete, and how the elements in our own bodies were forged in the hearts of ancient stars. Throughout it all, I kept returning to a central theme, how looking up at the night sky connects us to something larger than ourselves, something that puts our human concerns in perspective, while simultaneously making our brief existence feel more precious. The crowd was with me every step of the way, asking thoughtful questions, and gasping at particularly spectacular images. Even the youngest kids stayed engaged, their faces illuminated by the glow of distant stars projected on the screen. And my family? They were still there, watching intently. My father's expression had changed from polite interest to something that looked almost like wonder. As I wrapped up the presentation, a hush fell over the audience. The screen behind me showed a simple image, the view from my land on a clear night, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. Before everyone heads back to the telescopes for more observing, I want to share something I've learned during my time out here, I said. looking directly at the group of students sitting cross-legged at the front of the audience. Sometimes the things that seem empty or worthless to others might become your greatest treasure. Sometimes the path that everyone tells you not to take is exactly the one you should follow. Sometimes you have to stop looking at the ground beneath your feet and start looking up at the stars instead. I saw my father shift in his seat, his eyes meeting mine across the crowd. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, full of mysteries we're only beginning to understand, I continued. But one thing I know for certain is that every person here tonight has their own unique way of seeing it, their own perspective, their own contribution to make. Don't let anyone convince you that your view doesn't matter. After the presentation, as people dispersed to the telescopes and activity stations around the property, my father approached me. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then gestured at the festival around us. "You built all this," he said, not quite a question. "Not alone," I replied. "I had help. Good people who believed in the vision." He nodded slowly. I should have been one of them from the beginning. It wasn't quite an apology, but for my father, it was monumental. I didn't know what to say, so I just offered to show him and the rest of the family the NASA facility, the non-classified parts, anyway. They accepted, and for the next hour, we walked my land together as colleagues rather than adversaries. Later that night, after the festival had wound down and the last visitors had left, Chloe and I climbed to our favorite stargazing spot on a small rise at the edge of my property. The desert stretched out before us, silver by moonlight, and above us, the universe put on its nightly show. "I bought the adjacent property yesterday," I told her as we settled onto our blanket. "The Morrison Tract, another 100 acres that everyone thinks is worthless." She laughed. "Planning to expand the NASA contract?" "Actually," I said, "I was thinking it might be a good place to build a house. A real house, not just my tiny one, something permanent." She turned to look at me, her face half illuminated by starlight. "That's a big step for someone who's been living like a nomad." "I'm not a nomad anymore," I said, taking her hand. "I found where I belong, and who I belong with, under that vast canopy of stars." And then I asked Chloe to marry me. The ring I offered wasn't traditional. Instead of a diamond, it held a small meteorite fragment set in platinum. A literal piece of the cosmos we both loved so much. Her yes echoed across the desert, a promise as boundless as the sky above us. A year later, our home was completed. A modern structure of glass and stone designed to blend with the landscape, while offering unobstructed views of the sky from nearly every room. Solar-powered and water-efficient, it sat on the edge of my original property, a physical manifestation of how far I'd come from that desperate kid in an old RV. My relationship with my family was still evolving. Healing doesn't happen overnight. But they'd attended our wedding, helped with the house construction, and my father had even started volunteering at foundation events, small steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. The NASA facility continued its work on my original land, discovering new ways to peer into the depths of space. My foundation expanded its reach, bringing astronomy education to rural schools across the country. And my little desert homestead became a gathering place for scientists, educators, and dreamers of all kinds. Sometimes, on clear nights, Chloe and I still lie out under the stars, marveling at our unlikely journey from an impulsive land purchase to a life neither of us could have imagined. All because I refuse to accept other people's definition of value. The universe teaches us many lessons, if we're willing to listen. It shows us that light can travel for billions of years just to reach our eyes, that atoms forged in long-dead stars make up every cell in our bodies, that what appears empty can actually be full of unseen wonders. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: in a cosmos so vast and ancient, the brief flicker of human life might seem insignificant. Yet it's precisely our brevity that makes each moment precious, our tiny perspective that makes discovery so sweet, our limited understanding that makes exploration so necessary. Looking up at the stars reminds us that we're part of something immeasurably greater than ourselves. But it also reminds us that here, now, on this small planet circling an ordinary star, this is where our story unfolds. This is where we find our own constellations of meaning in the darkness. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find someone to search the sky with. So what about you? What worthless patch of dirt are you overlooking in your own life? What dream has everyone else told you is impractical, silly, or just plain useless? I'm telling you, sometimes those are the ones worth holding on to. Those are the places where your true value might just be waiting to be discovered. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let me know in the comments below. What's your nomad's land? What unexpected passion or place changed your life's trajectory? I love hearing your stories. And until next time, keep looking up. The universe is waiting.